You're listening to Celtics Beat Cuts, taken from the January 10th episode with guest Brian Scalabrine. Brian, we ask the tough questions here on Celtics Beat on CLNS Radio. This is not a simple talk show. So I am going to put you on the spot right away. How's life been like transitioning into becoming a broadcaster for Comcast Sportsnet New England?
How is that a tough question? That's an easy question. Life has been good. I mean,
I was being
think about
facetious.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's been good. I've been working with some of the best. Tommy Heinsohn has taught me so much. I've really grown to appreciate him, dealing with him on a day-to-day basis. Like last season, I did mostly road games. I've only did a couple home games. So I didn't get to see Tommy. But now, every home game, I get to sit down and talk to him about how the team is going. And he's been around the game for so long. He's been around the Celtics for so long. So he teaches me a ton. So that's been good. Mike Gorman, working with him, he's so honest with me and telling me how I need to improve. And then our producer, Paul Lucy, has just been, both these guys have been great in just guiding me along the way. And, there is an obligation to the fans of Boston to, entertain them when they turn on the TV, because it's not only just about teaching them the X's and O's, it's also about making them laugh after a hard day's work. So far I've been absolutely loving hanging out with those guys and learning the ropes, and I just really enjoy it.
Give me a little inside information as opposed to how Tommy feels if he's watched the team lose 4 of the last 5 games recently, particularly to 2 some of the dregs of the league and the Nets and the Lakers in that little stretch there.
Yeah, so he would want to know more about the different pick and roll coverages that teams are using, and he would want to know more about players who, like a Tyler Zeller, a guy who runs the floor every single possession. Why is a guy like him not playing? So he brings in his opinions. He's not. When people listen to Tommy, they think that he just rants and raves about the officials. But if you really listen, that's where he's going crazy, and people remember that. Or he calls LeBron a crybaby, and people will remember that. But you listen to what he has to say. He actually brings in a lot of knowledge of the game of basketball, and a lot of things that people are doing now, he did in 1960 as a coach. So it's something that you kind of get used to, and he's like I said, he has a great knowledge for the game, and he's not totally upset because he understands the process, and the process of the Celtics right now is with players, with a lot of, I would say they're, average to above average, and we have some pretty good players on our team, but not NBA Hall of Famers yet. With guys like that, you're going to have some up and down nights. It's just the way it goes. And I'm sure he was a little disappointed in the Laker loss and the Brooklyn loss, but, those things happen.
That's sort of a good transition here. That's sort of been pretty much the discourse of debate regarding the Celtics. When I was doing shows in August, I was very worried about the, I don't want to say the slew of mediocre players on the roster, but how the roster did seem a little congested. And now that the team has lost 4 of the past 5 games, that's sort of been the take. The Celtics don't have a rotation, and it seems like every time there's a bad loss, even going back to Jay Crowder after the Orlando game, end of November or whatnot, sure enough, he'd say, oh, geez, we need a rotation. How do you sort of come down on that? Is that sort of what's really hindering the Celtics so far this year? Is it the fact that pretty much up and down the roster, there's really been no rotation because of the guards, because none of the guards have really been all healthy all at once? I would say the front court's been a little bit of a disappointment. Is that what you think is really hindering the team so far this year?
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's really, if you think about when people complain about rotations, when Jay Crowder said that against Orlando, Marcus Smart just got hurt, and now Avery Bradley's out. So to have consistent rotation in an NBA season, everyone wants consistent rotation, but at the end of the day, guys get injured. And I think the rotation for the backcourt has been pretty solid. It's the front court that's really hard to go with because, one night you might need a Kelly Olynyk who can stretch the floor and open the floor up for Isaiah Thomas. Another night you might need a Jared Sullinger, a guy that can defend and rebound his position and can really own the paint. So, ideally you would have, a guy like Kelly Olynyk who can stretch the floor, knock down shots, and also be able to rebound, defend his position. But, the general makeup of a team that's built like this, which is a bunch of depth and, a lot of different types of players, is you're going to have different guys depending on the game. If we had, like I said, my whole thing would be, I would love one day for Kelly Olynyk to be that guy. I think that what he provides in today's day and age with a guy who can stretch the floor out. But he needs to be able to rebound at a high level. And some nights he does, and other nights he doesn't. And maybe that's a simple thing about going against guys with, big, a lot of size, and that bothers him. So you have to have a guy for that. So it's hard to say. It's not like you have Kevin Garnett out there who can knock down shots, defend, and rebound his position every single night, and he's probably better than the next guy. It's not like that. And every game we play, I would even say, like, if you look at last season, Jay Crowder played a lot at the 4, and our best lineups were with Jay Crowder at the 4. And just because of our front court and the disappointing, as you say, they've been disappointing, but only because every night it's not the same for these guys. I would say Jay Crowder should also be playing 4 for us sometimes, but it doesn't work like that because of the amount of players that we do have in that front court. So I think Brad has done. As a coach, I would have never wanted those problems. I want 8 guys and then a couple guys at the end where you can fill in. But Brad has 12, 13 legitimate basketball players that he has to fit into a rotation, and that's not easy to do.
By the way, before I get back to the point, I think you're really fitting in nicely here in Boston already, referring to the Celtics as us and we and our. But that was really what I was fretting about over the summer, was the fact that not because you can have all these guys, and you mentioned sort of that 2008 Celtics team. I mean, remember, that 08 Celtics team that you were on really did not have a true rotation. You had Sam Cassell playing like 25 minutes one game in the finals, and then he doesn't even play the clincher against the Lakers, and the doctor won an ice-cold Tony Allen of the game in Game 5. But I just think it's more of an issue in the sense that when you're trying to build sort of the positive culture that we always hear, very sort of simple and bland term, that you have 12 to 13 guys, but none of them, because they can really separate themselves from that next guy. Each and every guy on the team thinks that they should be playing 25 to 35 minutes a night. And while that can be good for quote-unquote competition, and that will drive players individually to get better, it just looks like when, especially if those players aren't getting better individually outside of Avery Bradley, it just looks like it's sort of becoming an issue for chemistry concerns, when you're considering that's sort of what the Celtics have seemingly put such a premium on when they're rebuilding here.
Well, I will say that the improvement of Jay Crowder as well as Avery Bradley, and I also would say if Marcus Smart if he didn't get injured, then we would see the emergence of Marcus Smart.
That would almost be an improvement in itself with him.
Yeah, I mean, him being on the floor,
yes.
That's is going to be the biggest thing for him, just staying improvement. But listen, I think our backcourt has been fantastic this season. With taking away, if Marcus Smart never got hurt, you would have a legitimate rotation with them. And you can't. I mean, Jay Crowder right now is top 10 at his position at small forward. I mean, he's up there with guys like you can compare him to. He's more efficient than Carmelo. He's up there with LeBron and KD. He's not those type of players, but when you look at efficiency and what he does, I mean, he plays defense. He knocks down threes. So I've been really happy with the top 3 guys. And you got guys like R.J. Hunter and James Young. Those guys are on the outside looking in, and Brad throws them a bone once in a while because these guys are working too, and they want to get an opportunity. The whole thing to me comes down back to that front court and establishing a front court rotation, which, you're going back to that 08 Celtic team, there is no Kevin Garnett on this team. Everyone is good. And the other night, Zach checks in the game against Brooklyn, does a fantastic job against Lopez, and the other guys struggled against him. So it's just you have to find, with our front court players, you got to find the right combination unless some separation happens.
Yeah, Danny Ainge mentioned that obviously on Toucher and Rich. I actually could not help but laugh. Obviously, listeners can watch that show on Comcast Sports Net New England at 6 o'clock every weekday morning. But that comment that he made about how the Celtics are trying to make a trade that sort of consolidates the roster a little bit, quantity for quality, I couldn't help actually but think of those old trades when I was growing up, when everybody wanted my Chipper Jones rookie card, and they were all throwing me all this, I'll give you the 1999 Toronto Blue Jays. Obviously, that's sort of like a thing in itself. It's like, I know, Danny, I think everybody wants to trade this guy, that guy, and this guy for this amazing player. But
yeah, everyone acts like it's an epiphany for Danny to say this. Danny has been on this from the beginning of time. I need to trade in as many good, I would say above average NBA players. Because all these guys are above average NBA players for one superstar. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's getting harder and harder to find.
Very, very hard.
Yeah, disgruntled superstars. If you look back, because first of all, I mean, people have to understand this. Basketball BRI, basically the split between the owners and players, it was at 57% to the owners 43. Now it's at 50-50. Now that's a huge difference when you're talking about the amount of money that the owners are making compared to what they did back in the day. So the owner and then another thing is the long contract. So if an owner is like, okay, well, I'm breaking even right now. I got this superstar, and he's not filling the seats, and I owe him for the next 4 years or 5 years because of the longer contracts. That's when you'll get an owner to say, okay, well, let's try to rebuild, take a couple draft picks, and we'll get a couple good players. Nowadays, contracts are 4 or 5 years. BRI split 50-50. So there's a big difference between how it used to be and how it is now. With the TV money coming in, guys are not letting James, like Oklahoma City, because of the amount of money that they would get from the national TV deal, not their local deal. They would never let James Harden walk. It's just the way it is now. Like the financial system is different. So people think it's going to be the same as it was in the past. It's not the same.
I know you always sort of have. I mean, I remember when I was talking about the draft picks and obviously the urgency of the Brooklyn draft picks with Jeff Goodman, and he would say, wait a minute, you would not trade the Brooklyn draft pick for, let's say, someone like an Andre Drummond came on the market. And I go, Jeff, I think that's sort of the point. Someone like an Andre Drummond, there's like 0% chance. There's really no one on the horizon whatsoever that's out there that can be acquired. And I actually think that I agree. I think it's going to get worse with all the new television money. Because a lot of times these owners in these small markets, say like a Chris Paul in New Orleans or whatever, these teams are now breaking even because they're sharing all this money and whatnot. So teams like the Lakers, they can't poach players from smaller markets. And actually, that's sort of been my theory. I mean, this is actually sort of totally drifting. But you look at, say, up and down the Eastern Conference and even a little bit in the West, everybody thinks that they're good and they're heading in the right direction and everyone's 500. And the league has sort of gotten that parity that they wanted in that last CBA deal, particularly the Charlottes, particularly all those teams that tried to cancel or actually did cancel the Chris Paul trade. And it seems like the league has achieved that. But because they have, it's going to make trading for very good players or younger players that we all think that could be very good players, because teams are now going to be gripping them infinitely more tighter than they were, say, 6, 7 to 10 years ago.
I mean, just look at, everyone's going to use the Warriors for an example, but the Warriors, first of all, they got a phenomenal deal in Steph Curry, but Klay Thompson is
all those guys were late lottery or second-round picks. Yeah,
so Draymond Green, he's a max player. You'll have Iguodala making 12, Bogut making 12, Curry's going to make 30, Harrison Barnes going to make 17. So I understand if everyone's saying you used to be able to have 2 max players in your team, and if you went for that third, you had to squeeze financially. It's not the same anymore. You can do so much more this year because of the TV money. And like you said, there's no advantage to being the Lakers or the Celtics or the Miami. And there is an advantage to be Miami because of the weather and taxes, whatever, but let's just not get into that. But it all comes down to, once again, if you're not going to be able to poach a player, with picks, then you got to draft right. You got to pick the right guys, and you got to develop through the draft. It's the easiest and best and lowest risk way to develop your team. If you think about it, if you botch a number 1 pick, let's just say that does happen. It hurts you because you botched the number 1 pick, but it doesn't hurt you financially at all. The number 1 pick makes around $4 million. That's not, you're taking such a low risk for that pick. Now, it would be different if the rookies came in and you had to negotiate a contract how it used to be, like Big Dog Robinson wanted $100 million right from the jump. It's a little bit different when you negotiate the deal beforehand. But now all these rookies are slotted. It's all about getting these picks. And if you have these chances like what we have right now, we own Brooklyn for the next 4 years. That's absolutely insane when you look at Brooklyn and where they're at and where they're going. I feel really, really good about those. And I think having Brad Stevens develop these guys and putting them into organization, which the Celtics are a great organization, that's going to be the best way to move forward and get better.
That's a good way to finish on that. I want to ask like a fun question, but there's really no better person to ask than you, because you're the broadcaster for the Man, Comcast Sportsnet, the television home for the Boston Celtics basketball. So I figure I already know what your stance is. So I'm going to make the assumption that you can prematurely argue from the other side. I said this in the opening. with the lack of improvement from individuals this year, once again, say Sans, Avery Bradley, and I guess you can say Jay Crowder, but that's pretty much it. But lack of improvement from much of the players on the team, and from how the team really gets away, in my eyes, from playing the right kind of basketball at the end of games and in tense situations. That, for me, and this could be just debauchery, me saying this, that, for me, has translated into me being, at times, bored with the team this year. So win me over here. Tell me why I should be a little more spiced up when I think about stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting. This season has gone, we've had a lot of ups and downs. If you think about, remember at the beginning of the season, those first quarters, they were awful, and we can score 19 points in the first quarter. Now we're getting off to good starts in the first quarter, and we're struggling down the stretch. I would say this. I think people are undervaluing the impact that Avery Bradley and Marcus Smart have on a basketball game. I think when you watch a game now, and we really haven't been that healthy with both those guys in, and what you want to see when you turn on a game, right? You want to see Isaiah Thomas cracking the defense and making plays, but you want to see guys bringing it on the defensive end, and you don't want to see Reggie Jackson going off in the fourth quarter. You want to see, or Jared Jack going off, or, in the past, Jared Jack had a big-time fourth quarter. And I think when you get that from the defensive side, Marcus Smart, Avery Bradley, locking guys up, and you have Jay Crowder on the wing. Once you start seeing that, that's the team that you're going to really like to watch. And then offensively, you won't have to rely so heavily on Isaiah Thomas, because you'll have a mix-up of Avery Bradley here or Marcus Smart there. But you have to get healthy, and you got to, and the backcourt has to be healthy. Go around the NBA right now and watch down the stretch of games. They're putting the ball in the point guard's hand. That point guard's making plays. We do the same thing, but it's nice to have a second option like a Bradley or a Smart. And I think once you start seeing that, I think once we're healthy, then you'll really like this team. I will say this: besides Cleveland, who I think is pretty much in a different stratosphere, maybe the Bulls are starting to get to that level, I feel confident that we'll beat any team in the first round in the Eastern Conference besides the Cavs. I would feel like with everyone healthy and Brad Stevens, I would feel really confident that we'd win that first round series.
That's a bold statement. That should be almost the perfect way of finish you off here on that. But I do have to ask one more final question, because once again, going back to sort of what I asked at the beginning of what was sort of really the pulse of the Celtics fans, a lot of things, this will be the final question, a lot of that was on Celtics and the media's mind as the team was starting to struggle was why the team was losing to bad teams, particularly a lot of home games as well. Do you really sort of have any opinion on that? I know I have mine, but it's obviously your segment. So,
I don't understand why we lost to the Lakers, but I can understand why we lost to Brooklyn. If you think about it, is Brook Lopez better than all of our front court players? He probably is. So he had a tremendous game. He had 30 and 13. He made a lot of shots. And when you get up and you're struggling and you're having a hard time scoring, those big men that when you have a 10-point lead, it's hard to come back from when they can control pace with the big. So now the Celtics are in trying to double team him and give wide open shots. So I get the Brooklyn one. I believe me, I wanted to win that. But the Laker one, I can go down. I would have put $1 million that we would have beat the Lakers. That team to me was a bad team. That team doesn't have any discipline on offense or defense. That one, I'm going to be honest with you, just like a lot of people out there, I don't understand that. But the Brooklyn game, those guys had good games. Joe Johnson played good. Brook Lopez played good. Thaddeus Young played good. And those guys are on our team. I don't know if I would take Joe Johnson now, but I think that we would take Thaddeus Young and Brook Lopez. So they had better players than us that night. Their guards were awful, and I couldn't understand why we couldn't just completely dominate their guards. But Lopez did an excellent job.
Yeah, I've just sort of been just really more so concerned, not in the fact that they lose to bad teams. A lot of people say when you lose to a bad team at home, particularly at home, they say, oh, you just need to come in more focused. I think it's safe to say, especially as for you who played in the NBA as long as you did, you're not going to be able to bring it every single night in the NBA. I'm more so just concerned with the fact that I think that this team really seems to struggle in the sense that in adverse situations, I don't think they respond too well. I know it's a young team, but it's also been at least nearly now a full calendar year when they really turned things around under Brad Stevens. there's still, I hate using cliche phrases. I save that for sort of the corporate suits in the media. No offense, sorry, because not you. But this team really doesn't seem to, quote unquote, dig deep or really win games ugly. If things go well, they can sort of cruise on in, but they don't really win an ugly game. They play like crap for 3.5 quarters, but they're at home. They can ride a crowd for a little bit, go on a run, and then that's all they need. And they'll win a few games. But I don't know.
But how much different is this team than last year's team? And last year's team grinded themselves out a lot of wins late in the year. From February on, they could be down 15. They could find a way to come back and win the game. So I understand. There is actually a lot of stats that 100% back what you're saying. Do you know that we haven't won a game this season in which we didn't have a 10-point lead? That's almost hard to even imagine that we haven't won a game in which we weren't up 10, which is exactly backs what you're saying. But last season we came back from 13 all the time and got to the end, and this team keeps fighting. So I think a lot of it could be injuries, and they got to find out their rotation. I think Brad is starting to, I like Kelly Olynyk in the starting lineup. I think he does a lot of good things, but you got to find that right combination, and it's not so clear cut as other teams out there because we don't have those Hall of Fame players.
Good way to finish out on that. Brian Scalabrine, Comcast Sports Net New England. Brian, hope you enjoyed your maiden voyage here on Celtics Beat.
All right. Anytime, I guess.
Future content courtesy of the #1 podcast on the web, which covers the Boston Celtics. Thanks for listening. To hear the complete interview, click the link in the description below. Also, feel free to subscribe to Celtics Beat on various outlets such as iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you don't miss any future content courtesy of the #1 podcast on the web, which covers the Boston Celtics.